Welcome back. We're getting right to some talking points in our next panel. We'll begin with Michael Bloomberg's first week hitting the campaign trail in the 2020 presidential race. Here to break it all down are Chris Coffey, head of the New York practice for Tusk Ventures, and CBSN New York's urban affairs expert, Mark Peters. Chris, you actually worked on all three of Mike Bloomberg's campaigns for mayor, so are you surprised that he decided to enter the race at the 11th hour?
I don't think I was surprised. I think enthusiastic. I think he made a calculation that the field is not as strong as it could be, and that there's a place for someone who's spent 12 years running the city, created his own business, started from nowhere, used to park cars to get his way through college, to pay his way through college. He's got a great story, and I think he thinks, and folks around him, and certainly I think it'll resonate with people all across the country who haven't gotten a chance to know him as well.
But it's an unusual strategy.
Sure.
Skip the early presidential primaries, go right to Super Tuesday.
Marcia, I remember you covering 2001, right? Who thought Mike Bloomberg had a chance to win in 2001 when he was 60 points down in the polls, you know, two months out, and people said...
And there he was.
Yeah, and there he was in a very unusual strategy. Mike Bloomberg is unconventional. He's innovative. He was a tech entrepreneur before there were tech entrepreneurs. And I think you're going to see an unconventional campaign. I think, you know, skipping these early states, going out to where there's some diversity, some big cities, people with a divergence of opinions, I think will be good for him. And I think there'll be a muddled, I think you could easily see a muddled first four states where Buttigieg wins one, and Warren wins one, and Biden wins one, and Sanders wins one, or some combination.
And then you think he's got a path.
And then I think he's got a path. And
Mark, do you agree with that?
I have to say I don't entirely agree with that. I mean, Mike Bloomberg is famous for saying he likes to look at data, and the data here isn't good in two different respects. The first is that in national polling now, he's at about 2%. And at the same time, close to 70% of respondents say they know enough about Mike Bloomberg to have an opinion. So the kind of money that he can spend is great if you're an unknown candidate at 2% because it can get you known. But when a huge percentage of the electorate, 70%, says they already think they know enough about you, it's a lot harder to get yourself above 2% when people already feel like they know what they're talking about.
So the other campaigns have had a year and a half, you know, and lots of time in Washington to get out and get their message out. Mike, I think, is at 3% in the poll I saw yesterday. And I think that's the first poll. He hasn't spent $1 yet. So now he's just started to spend money. He's going to be out there. He's in Virginia. He's in Arizona. By the way, people aren't going to those states. You're not seeing Buttigieg and Warren and Sanders and Biden in some of these states. He's going to have them to himself. He's going to be massively on the air. I think he's on the air at Channel 2 and New York 1 as we speak. And he'll be on the air across the country, and people will get to know him. He has a great story, right? Like his story of started from nothing, created this company with 10,000 jobs, and successful mayor after 9/11, guns and climate change. He has a successful story, and by the way, like we kind of need that right now.
Here's a question for both of you. My question is, will Bloomberg not being in the debates because he's self-funding make it difficult for Democratic voters to measure him against the other candidates? Because basically you're going to see his media buys, the way he's decided to introduce himself to people, but you won't measure him against all the other people in the debate, and he's not going to be subject to the slings and arrows of a debate.
Well,
Mark.
Well, I think that's certainly true, and to some extent it may actually be to his advantage to not be in the debates because he won't be subject to those slings and arrows, although clearly people are going to be, and they've already started attacking him even absent the debates. On the other hand, there's something to be said for being seen on the debate stage with everybody else when this is going on. So I think that there are both pluses and minuses to it, but it's clearly the strategy he's stuck with.
But don't you think, though, that people are, the other candidates are sort of flailing about for a way to attack him, and basically their best shot is he's a billionaire and that's it?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, by the way, I don't think you're going to hear Mike criticizing the other candidates. Like, that's not really his style. I think he's going to go out. He's going to talk about himself. He's going to talk about his record. He's going to talk about some of the things he's done as mayor. And I don't know that he, I think we'll have to see whether he's on the debate stage or not. Certainly right now.
Do you think he should be on the debate stage, or that it would be good for him to actually join the fray?
I think if Mike is successful and starts to really move up in the polls as his message gets out there, it'll be hard to keep him off the debate stage.
I think that may be true, but I'm not sure I would describe the attack so far on Bloomberg as flailing. I think that beyond he's a billionaire, there are some very legitimate policy issues. Stop and frisk is the most prominent. I mean, stop and frisk was a disastrous policy. 6 years later, we are still feeling, the effects of that policy.
By the way, 6 years later, the policy is still in place, and Bill de Blasio has spent more time in the last 2 days criticizing Mike Bloomberg than he spent running the city. And Mike Bloomberg, by the way, and Mike Bloomberg has gotten more press in 1 day than Bill de Blasio has gotten in 6 months of running his campaign.
So let's move on to another topic. The City Council this week passed a bill that would ban the vaping and flavored e-cigarettes, sparking what may be actually the first political dogfight between, dare I say it, Mike Bloomberg and President Trump, because apparently the president walked back his support for this kind of legislation, allowing Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg, to tweet that the president was caving to big tobacco. Are we going to see that as an ongoing thing as this campaign evolves?
I mean, certainly Mike has been, since in 2002, you would go to the parades with him in Bay Ridge, which I would join you with, and people would be short of throwing tomatoes at him. It was deeply unpopular to ban cigarettes back then in bars and restaurants, and then eventually beaches and other places. And it is now one of the most popular things. We can't imagine a world that has
He
those
was
things.
the one who started it worldwide.
And it was deeply unpopular at the time. And Mike has been someone who is willing to make unpopular decisions that he thinks will pay off, whether it's raising property taxes on the wealthy and on property owners, or whether it's smoking. So I think he's out ahead of this. If you're standing up for vaping like Donald Trump, that's a tough one. It's hard to defend that. So we'll see.
Yeah, look, Mike Bloomberg has been a leader on this for years. The smoking ban is clearly one of the high points of his legacy. He's obviously right on this. I mean, vaping is coming in flavors like bubble gum and cotton candy. We know who that's targeted to. We know that's targeted to children.
But one of the things about the vaping bill that was passed is that it didn't include banning menthol cigarettes. Let's hear what Corey Johnson had to say about it.
Menthol cigarettes are, again, predominantly used by the African-American community, and we've seen a variety of incidents. Given the Garner incident, given other incidents that we've seen across the city, I have concerns.
So the issue here is this. Banning menthol cigarettes is something that people feel they need to do because the menthol flavor is appealing to people. But there's also a concern in many communities that this could lead to over-policing, like in the Eric Garner case. Question is, should they be banned? Shouldn't they be banned?
Well, I think they should, and I think it's very, very tortured logic to suggest that banning menthol cigarettes is going to lead to over-policing. Is there a problem of over-policing? Absolutely. There is, and this mayor, as Sean just pointed out, bears some real responsibility for that. But the solution to over-policing is not to allow menthol cigarettes, which are killing people, to be in these communities. The solution is to go at over-policing in the same way that stop and frisk was over-policing.
But let me ask you this. What is the political calculus for all of these people in the city council, many of whom are term limited and are going to be seeking other jobs, whether it's mayor, borough president, public advocate, controller? Isn't there a political liability to seeking to ban menthol cigarettes in some communities?
Sure. I think that it's not as clear-cut as it seems, but I also don't think the issue is over yet. I think you have not seen the last of this particular issue. It is a tough issue. There have certainly been African-American leaders on both sides of this issue that have talked about the pros and the cons, and I think you'll see the council deliberate. I think there's a whole bunch of support on the bill, and I think we'll see what happens. I don't think you've seen the last of it.
Okay, we're going to move on to National Grid. The governor took on National Grid, imposing getting them to back off a controversial gas moratorium. Now he's going after Con Ed. Let's hear what he had to say about that.
We're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be pressured. We're not going to be extorted. Con Edison, like National Grid, has a franchise by the state to provide gas if we like the way they're doing it.
So if the governor is willing to go after National Grid and Con Ed, what does it say about other companies, cable companies, telephone companies, others who have franchises to provide service in New York City and New York State? I mean, should they be worried?
I think probably they should be a little worried. I mean, the governor just won a big victory with National Grid. I expect that he's going to take the same tact with Con Ed, because Con Ed's putting out the same exact. I mean, we're watching this movie just play out again. If he wins with Con Ed, I think that the governor is going to realize he's got this very, very powerful cudgel to hold over a lot of other companies, and this is a governor who doesn't, relinquish powerful, levers of power too frequently.
I'm much like playing chicken with Andrew Cuomo. If you're a big corporate entity that's really not going to go to the mat, like, I'm not sure if that's the best strategy that they just employed, and they got rolled. And I think I expect it'll be a good outcome for New Yorkers, although they have to work out this long-term pipeline solution. But I think we saw it with Spectrum over last year. I think you've seen it now with National Grid. And if your strategy is going up against Andrew Cuomo in a chicken leg scenario, I wouldn't recommend that to anyone that I would.
So your advice is don't do it.
I wouldn't do it unless it depends what kind of hand you have. Most of these corporate entities are risk averse. They don't want to be in the headlines every day. They don't have, they're going to the corporate board, and the last thing they want to be doing is, and so you go up against Andrew Cuomo, like, you should know the outcome before you play your hand. And it felt like National Grid just bet big with a pair of nothing.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on The Point. Coming up, we'll get to hear the best and the worst about New York City during the holidays. Stay with us.